concept of the Internet of Things raises a whole host of questions. As more devices become connected, what do we do with all of this data? There's already so much data that marketers are grappling with. How does the Internet of Things change the relationship between consumers, brands, products? What are the challenges and opportunities here? What's happening now? We have a lot of abstract conversation about the Internet of Things, but thinking about what's real now is really important as well. So Howard, I thought we'd start with you to talk about what you're doing now at IBM. This conversation can get abstract really quickly. So tell us how you're thinking about this at IBM.
Sure. The basic premise is that we have a world right now that's very, very instrumented. So every object, every item that we possess, and certainly a lot of the things that are both within the consumer electronics that we use and within industry, throw off a lot of data. So the ability to act and operate on that data is really the critical thing. So we do a lot of work right now in not only helping to create instrumentation, but the really big investment is in managing the data, providing the ability to do analysis on that data in order to gain insight out of it. So I come from the school that says the marketer and the chief marketing officer needs to be the steward of the customer experience. And I think historically that's meant what we would call kind of a presentation layer, right? Let's think about the design, let's think about advertising, let's think about marketing campaigns, but we're in a world right now where consumers describe their interaction with the brand around the responsiveness of a product, or they describe their interaction with the brand from how clearly they can engage with customer service, or whether the next product line reflects the things that the consumer groups are talking about online or in Reddit or wherever. So I think instrumentation allows us to generate data. The problem is always, how do you analyze that data? So we've got, I think, a few key areas that we're investing in, and that's the cloud in terms of our ability to actually create products that allow us to manage that data, big data and analytics, and the Watson products that we have. But we have an interesting set of case studies that we've invested in. So we have partners, for example, we have a partner that runs one of the largest wind turbine farms in the world. And they manage over 65,000 wind turbines in 60 countries. They throw off gigabytes of data every day. And so what we end up doing is doing real-time analysis of whether the actual turbines themselves as a way to monitor and constantly optimize the way the turbines are performing so that we can optimize grid performance. So the customer experience part of that is 3 or 4 steps away. It's more of a B2B play. But for us, the optimization is around the performance of the product.
Are there any lessons that can be drawn from that B2B interaction that can be applied going forward to B2C?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that for the B2C trend that we're seeing around Internet of Things, I think people talk about marketing and marketing's role for Internet of Things, and they assume that they're going to have to opt out of their toaster. They think that you're going to have some sort of pop-up banner on your toaster because your toaster is tracking how much toast you have, and
that would be so useful.
It would be so super
useful.
That. I'm going to preemptively opt out of my toaster. But I think when you go back to this point of marketers owning the overall customer experience, I think the opportunity there for a B2C environment is to say, let's look at all the data, let's gain insights out of it, and let's optimize our product design. Let's optimize the way customer service operates. Let's optimize our messaging. Let's optimize personalization and targeting. So I think those are the key areas. And so for me, it all goes back to insight and operating on that data in the right way, because otherwise it's just an enormous amount of data that's impossible to manage.
So Andy, how do you think about this interface going forward? How do you see different brands starting to wrap their heads around this challenge?
I think our point of view is that our perspective is that it's an inevitability that physical objects, products, so we focus on consumer products, but we're B2B in the sense that we operate for those manufacturers who make them, that it's an inevitability these objects will become digitized and they will become interactable and they will become instrumented. And it's just a question of when that happens in different industries and what you do with that capability once it's there. So what we do is we help companies do that, to digitize their products and to do what we think is the most important thing to unlock the value. Is it's not just how you connect your products to the internet. There's been a lot of focus on that, the connectivity, and X connects to Y. But what happens once you do? How do you create applications really easily that unlocks value from the enterprise? And how do you manage all of the real-time data that's flowing to and from these products? So that's what we do as a sort of platform in the cloud. And I think these two domains are very connected because, exactly as you said, once you start instrumenting things, in a way, a modern product, a modern object is a combination of hardware and software and real-time data. And it's only by understanding those three pieces and how they operate together and being able to do something productive with them and actually harness that I think businesses will be able to compete, because that will be the nature of what products and objects are going forward. So you need to understand how you put connectivity in the hardware, how you manage the data that comes from that in the software, and the real-time nature of that data changes what that product can do in terms of its function, its performance, and how it kind of learns and improves itself over time.
So it seems that there are so many opportunities, obviously, right, brought by this idea of having all these connected devices. One is, as you say, by having the product actually work better, that it becomes a learning product that can change and improve as the company has more information about the consumer using it. What about from an advertising point of view? As you say, we don't really want a banner ad on our toaster, but what's the opportunity there? What do you see as being feasible, something that consumers would tolerate or welcome?
I think it's maybe a slightly semantic distinction, but I always sort of think in terms of marketing rather than advertising, because advertising tends to suggest that it's effectively an interruptive kind of broadcast message, or at least a message that's pushed in some context. Whereas I think if you look at it in terms of marketing, effectively, especially relationship marketing, which is kind of relationships and interactions with customers over time, then effectively products become an entirely new channel, a digital channel that provides an ongoing data relationship with those customers. And I think how you use that can obviously veer from the inappropriate and sort of pushing them pop-up banners on their smartphone when they make toast in the morning, to the very smart, which is you're actually learning what happens with the product. You're then optimizing how that product performs. You're communicating with people based on the knowledge about how they're actually using the thing that they bought and they care about. So we have this sort of term we call sort of product relationship management, that actually the thing you really care about, that you spent your money for, is not necessarily the brand. The brand tends to become more important the lower interest the category is. Not in every case, but often it's the object itself that has the energy. And actually, if that object is the focal point of the relationship through data, then incredibly powerful things are possible because you're in constant contact with your customer. And I'm just reminded of, there was a quote by Stefan Ollander, I think from Nike Digital Sport, who said, if you're in an ongoing relationship with a customer, you don't need to advertise to them, because actually there's no need to say, please, can we have your attention? You are actually already in a conversation with them. So I think it's very important to sort of use this real-time world that we're in to move out of this campaign mindset, where it's very much a kind of labors over time that have a particular endpoint, and then you start again, and actually look at the interaction with the customer as the start. In a sense, when the campaign ends, the relationship begins, and there are tremendous possibilities that unlocks.
Do you see industries that are leading here? So you mentioned Nike, for example. There's so many, I used to cover healthcare for The Economist. There's so many companies in the healthcare space that are thinking about the smart home and all different kinds of health monitoring beyond, Fitbit, but to more sophisticated types of health monitoring devices. But do you see different industries that are leading the way towards this Internet of Things? Either of you, which are most interesting?
I mean, I think healthcare is certainly a very, very interesting and important place where you look at the instrumentation of objects that generate data that we can then act on. And I think for us, I think the big key is our ability to act, right? Analyze data, act on that data. So what kind of objects are generating data? Healthcare is a big one. I think that automotive is a very interesting case right now. I think that there's a lot of really great examples of places where software is affecting and data generation is affecting the way that cars are designed, built, and operate. There's a lot of discussion right now around the customer experience of Tesla. So when you sit in a car and you turn it on and it's updated overnight and the UI of the dashboard has changed and the performance and the suspension has been tweaked in order to match road conditions for your normal driving patterns, like that's brilliant, that's genius, right? And that requires data analysis on the vehicle itself. It requires a management of that. It requires the ability for the company to act on that data, right? So how do you gain insights on it? How do you have your product development lifecycle and your DevOps frameworks in such a way that you can actually release new code on an ongoing basis? And then how do you distribute and load that into the car? But from a customer perspective, and I think this is where the marketer job begins, the customer's perspective is, I have a better product. I have a better product, it works better, I have a better relationship with it. And I completely agree with you that there is a place and time where we do need to, as marketers, create a message and distribute that to people in order to generate kind of frame of mind, share of voice, et cetera. But really, in the end, if we're doing it correctly, the product itself generates the kind of relationship that a customer wants, such that you don't need to message to them further. So this is I was watching some of the previous panels, and there's a lot of discussion around the changing role of marketers. And I think that the marketer of the future has to be one who can wage a deep, intense debate with product management, data management, CIO, release engineers. Like, these are all things that affect customer experience. Imagine the debate that would go on if it wasn't a technology-oriented company, if the CMO of Tesla came and said, I want to be able to push down, suspension tweaks overnight to the car and redo the UI dashboard. I mean, that is very much a customer experience thing, but it starts with a technology relationship. It starts with technology infrastructure. So marketers have to have this fluency in technology that they didn't before. So I think healthcare, I think automotive, I think gaming, we can learn a lot from gaming. We do a lot of interesting work with electronic arts, and the ability for us to manage and monitor in-game behavior to tweak how difficult levels are in mobile games. So if the level is too difficult, people will abandon the game. If it's not difficult enough, they'll blast through it and they'll switch to another game. So we allow product managers to be able to go into mobile games and actually tweak the parameters of the game based on real-time usage.
Andy?
I think there's a couple of really interesting things happening at the moment, and certainly we have a particular view of the Internet of Things that maybe is slightly different to the current narrative, or at least where all of the focus is going on, which is pretty predominantly smart home based for consumer products and machine to machine for sort of industrial internet. And our view comes from, if you like, the origins of the Internet of Things at the Auto ID labs in MIT was actually dumb products made smart. So when you put RFID tags with a reader in combination with an object that has no electronics, has no network connectivity or intelligence, suddenly it becomes sentient and intelligent because it's being tracked and monitored, and that network then provides business possibilities and value. So there's actually a world happening now, we feel, where you can work with embedded electronics in objects, be those machines in an industrial setting, wind turbines, or actually be that a washing machine in the home. But you can also work with consumer packaged goods and highly consumable, disposable items. Came up a little bit in the last panel about printed electronics and smart packaging. So what we do is we work with that industry as well to figure out how you can add network intelligence to an object, even if it's a can of soda or a pack of biscuits or some washing powder, because there's a range of connectivity technologies that's possible now because everybody has smartphones. And as Tim O'Reilly's sort of talked about quite extensively, Uber is a great example of an IoT company in some ways. It's a fleet of smart vehicles that happen to be made smart by the app on the smartphone. The smartphone has electronics in it that's comparable to a Nest anyway, so effectively it instruments that car. So there's actually a world of very, very interesting possibilities for marketers. And everything we've talked about could apply to a consumable product. If you create a data layer around a product by managing real-time information in the cloud about what you get when you interact with that product, and that is personalized to you by location, by type of SKU, possibly by individual item, by your past history. It can pull in real time from CRM systems. It can pull from other data sources on the internet. It could pull from electronic arts, gaming APIs. So what would be the equivalent of a toy in a cereal box today? I would say it would be that I could interact with my cereal packet X number of times and it would unlock a level in an EA game. These things suddenly create new propositions for marketers based on a whole digital layer that comes with the product. So for a consumer, if when I buy a product, I take physical possession of it, and now when I buy a certain kind of product, I can take digital ownership of the world of value that comes with that. It's differentiated, it's stickier because it's barriers to switching, it has my data, my preferences, and there are even possibly new subscription models and new kind of value that you can add from a business model point of view.
So I'm going to ask one more question and then get your questions ready because we'll move to the audience. But one of the things that strikes me as you're talking is both the interdisciplinary nature of the people within the company who need to be thinking about this, whether it's marketers, tech people, et cetera, but also about how to ask the right questions with all the data that you're getting and who's the person doing that kind of analytics. That seems to me to be one of the biggest challenges here. What would you describe? Do you agree, or what do you think is the big challenge here?
You mean who in the organization has the stewardship of managing that
exactly.
data? I think that's an excellent question. I mean, every agency, every marketing function within major brands that I talk to is building an analytics function, But I think that it's not enough to talk about analytics. I think you have to talk about the smart application of intelligent services to the data that you possess. So for example, it's not enough to say I do analytics on a human basis and I actually produce reports or even manage dashboards. I think you have to apply machine intelligence to the volume of data that we're generating. Right? And so I think that means the right set of services that are going to help you gain the kind of insight. So if you're looking for patterns of interaction within software, or if you're looking for, in the case of wind turbines, the idea of understanding weather patterns to physical performance of a turbine itself, either way, you need to have specialized services that can do analysis based on your business. And so I think marketers have to partner with the CIO and the CTO in order to choose the set of services that will analyze the data in the right way. So analytics and the ownership of analytics and reporting is an important function. But for me, it all boils back down to the intelligent management of services for the marketing function.
Okay.
I definitely agree with that, and maybe see it in a slightly different way in that I see that, if you like, sort of technology platform function and analytics as almost a horizontal layer that underpins all of the activities. And, data really is actually, I think has been said before, it's a sort of economic input on a par with labor. It's not a thing that's off to the side, that's one of a number of channels or competencies. The reason I think people say data is the new oil is not just because it's a nice phrase, but because it probably plays the same role in the economy as oil does, which is in everything, and it powers everything, and if you take it away, things start to not work anymore. So I think the really interesting relationship is a little bit how tech companies work, where the relationship between product management and marketing. So there has to be these are flip sides of the same coin. What the product is, what it does, how it functions, what services it's capable of, at the point of conception, I think marketing needs to be involved in that because they are close to the consumers and the insights and the customers and what the market wants. At the point that then that product has new capabilities that's enabled by connectivity, then the marketers have a whole new suite of tools and channels at their disposal to interact with those customers. So, for example, some of the instances that I gave where the product now can improve itself over time. Because in the same way that Gmail might mail you and say, hey, we've just given you a terabyte more storage, the product can say, I've upgraded the entertainment library that comes with me, or in a firmware update, I've suddenly am able to sense different things. And I think that's really important, because one last thing that I'll say is what's so interesting about sensors is when you apply sensors to things, they can change out of all recognition. They don't just pick up information that's nice to have, like I didn't know the wind speed before and now I do. We're working with a lighting company that we sort of announced recently, and they're providing LED lights that do the same thing that these lights do. They provide luminescence, but they also have sensors in them, which means they can act as smoke alarms, they can act as security systems, and they can even read tags such as RFID or Bluetooth, so they can begin inventory control systems. So suddenly this is a multi-function, different proposition, and each of those has different marketing possibilities.
So Howard, the big question for today that we're asking of our panelists is, if you could ask your CEO for one investment that would help your organization work better, your marketing organization work better, what would it be?
Wow, that's an enormous question. What would can I punt and have him answer first?
Well, I think he's his own boss, if I understand
there you
correctly.
go.
So what would you ask yourself?
I think that the one
say in English sport that's known as a hospital pass.
There you go, a hospital pass.
Someone the ball.
The simple answer would be, I think that, I'm focused on developers right now, and for us, and actually I think it's an interesting topic for this audience, because I think that the developer, every company has to be a software innovation company. So developers have to become an influencer to the CMO. Like, that's a very strange thing. I've kind of split my career between marketing and software development. So I think the investment that I would be very interested in is creating new communities between different lines of business and developers. And I think in this case, marketers, creating connections between marketers that understand code and understand how data operates, not just in terms of direct and one-to-one marketing or personalization, but literally understanding how software innovation happens. So investments in that would be very important for me.
Okay, so we're going to go to the audience. I do have to ask, we have a polling question that should be available on your app or through going to tbr2015.cnf.io and clicking on polling questions. So the question is, does your marketing organization employ data scientists? This is sponsored by Platfora. A, yes, B, no, or C, no, we're planning to do so. But questions from the audience? Yes, in the back here on the right. There should be someone coming to you with a microphone.
Matt Van Dalsum with BlackRock. I'm wondering about the human effect of more data, more information surrounding us, since on the plane ride over, I was actually reading a magazine, and Outside magazine, for what it's worth, and there's the subject was how we as humans can be happier, and one of the central tenets of the argument was put technology away. So I'm wondering, do we as people, are we ready for all this?
It's an interesting question. I'm a bit of a geek, so I feel like we can take inspiration from science fiction. Science fiction helps us put the human condition in a different context. And I think that some of the best science fiction that I've read or engaged in describes a future where you're not engaging in technology, you're just operating in a way that's very different for humanity, right? Where we actually have the ability to affect the world around us without having to think about how it works. And I think that's how great technology should work. So in the end, I think the real ultimate promise of instrumenting everything in the way that we're talking about, aside from banner ads on your toaster oven, which is a great feature, the best case scenario is that the world around us and the tools that we use stop having to be operated by us, and we literally are just able to interact with them in a way that's right for us. And in effect, that negates the interaction with technology.
I agree, and I think also that's probably talking about a particular type of modern sort of communications technology and the syndrome of smartphones and so on, which is super important. I think if you ask the question to those people, should you put technology away in your life to be happy, and that includes your washing machine and your car and your heating system, and I think the answer would be slightly different. So that's an exemplar to me of exactly that point, that we're at a stage where we have this, we haven't really established feels like a ship that's left one shore and hasn't arrived at the other one yet. So it's kind of slightly lost its bearings from old existing conventions, and it hasn't necessarily established the new ones and the norms. So there's a bit of overload and overwhelmingness about all of this information flow. And I think that will become ameliorated by different filters, different tools to manage that flow, and the technology folding back into the physical world. What's so interesting about the Internet of Things, to me personally, is this marriage of atoms and bits, that we can move out of a purely screen-based mediated world into a world that actually has intelligence in it. And this idea that everything can be an interface, any object can become an interface in a whole variety of ways, some of which may be simply being aware of the fact that you're in a room versus out of a room. I think these things will dramatically change how people feel about that technology's presence in their lives.
Other questions? Just right here in the front, this gentleman.
Thank you for an interesting discussion. I see Internet of Things happening.
If you wouldn't mind telling us who you are, that'd be great.
Hi, I'm Chander from Moki. We are a company doing Internet of Things, among other things.
Thanks. It's a small task, so you've got it.
So I see Internet of Things, one side is business or industrial, which is happening already. Another side is consumer. And you talked about interactivity with products which have embedded sensors. What price premium do you think consumers are willing to pay for that interactivity? There's a cost of doing all this. Do you think consumers are willing to pay a certain amount of more money? Thanks.
It's a great question. I mean, I think there's a number of dimensions to this. So first of all, the cost is changing constantly and dramatically. So you have to be looking forward to a point where there's almost going to be a zero marginal cost to adding connectivity to things. Not yet, not now. And the economics change in different products. So if you're putting connectivity into something that costs, $30,000 like a car, or $5,000 like a consumer appliance, it's obviously different than a packet of biscuits. I think that the second point is that there's a number of ways to make the economics work. So one of them could be charging more money to consumers. Another could be saving costs and making the efficiencies of the channels in production, sort of preventing counterfeit activity or parallel trade activity, or simply improving the efficiency of the way those products are actually made and transported to the point of sale. And that could be enough to offset the costs of doing it. And the third thing is that the actual services you offer consumers could also be in a sort of gradiated sense. So you could make ROI by differentiating your products at point of sale so that people choose product A versus B. And then you could also offer, freemium sort of services so that the product can actually give you more if you want to pay more for it. So there's a number of different ways you can model this, I think. It's not simply a question of, if it costs me X more to actually make this product smart, will people pay more to cover that cost?
I would say our ambition should be that instrumenting objects should lead to price performance. Like I think that should be a goal, because if you understand how people are interacting with your product set, whether it's physical or software, then you can really optimize the feature sets that you're creating and reduce development time. If you're focused on just-in-time manufacturing and employing things like DevOps practices for software delivery, then you should be able to really refine the expense around rolling out new products or new feature sets to customers. And so I think reducing cost is actually something, not now, but that in the future should be the goal of instrumenting and creating IoT applications.
I'd say there's a sort of if you actually want to get provocative about it, there's an argument that could say that the data becomes so valuable that you can either, in the case of, say, medicines, give away the products for free or for a microcent, and then charge for the personalization of their efficiency, how they work for your personal genome type. So then, if you like, the cost of the product gets changed based on how you use it. Or simply that if you're using data to manage how that product is made and sold and experienced by consumers, then perhaps the value of knowing that is enough to subsidize the cost of giving that hardware away for free. So I was talking with a friend the other day about, if you think about TVs and how much value goes through TVs in commercials, you could probably look at the Super Bowl spend and divide it by the number of TV sets in people's houses and come up with a dollar figure of how much each set has had value created through that one set of advertising. So actually, it's very possible in the future that there'll be data subsidization of hardware, and that will change the model of products as well.
So I want to get in a few more questions if we can. Yes, in the middle here. Thanks.
Yeah, Craig Brennan, Quick Mobile, the app that you guys are using today. My observation is that this all starts with the mindset of the CEO and the CMO, that if you fundamentally understand that everything can be turned in, it can have a sensor, and that the data underlying it, as you were just saying, is the real value. So I just wanted to guys address the mindset as you approach this in your experiences of your customers or whatever, in terms of understanding, shifting from kind of an analog mindset to a digital mindset.
I think it's an interesting point. I think there's a few things. One is the management of the volume of data. IBM has an enormous marketing function. Just talking about our marketing activities, the management of that data is huge and complex. I think if we had started last year, we would have employed a different set of skills and technologies in data management, but we're dealing with, customer relationships that go back decades and longer. So the volume of data for us is an intense problem. I think that there's a couple of things. One is privacy. I think we need to talk about privacy as marketers. And if we're going to be marketing to people based on data we're collecting from them, there's immediately going to be a privacy issue. I think the second is this notion of the volume of data should be directly proportional to the value that we're creating. And if we're collecting data and we're not providing value for that data that we're collecting, then we're just wasting our company's money as marketers. And I think that there's an obsession with collecting data, but there's not a lot of strategy on what to do with it.
Let's just sneak in one more question. Yes, this gentleman here, just five rows back.
Thank you. Keith Brody, E-Trade. I was wondering if you could give me your views on the role of a CMO and CEO and the role machine learning and that whole intelligence could play.
I think CMOs and CEOs will definitely be machines in the future. I'm absolutely confident about that.
Yeah, I guess
You can't follow that up.
I completely agree. Yeah, but I suppose machine learning is I suppose a subset in a way of the discussion about instrumentation, data flow, and machine learning is essentially what do you apply to that data, and how do you harness it to then drive back value to the applications. So again, in the example of Uber, there is clearly data that is being collected, and then there's machine learning applied to that to optimize the marketplace created by that. I think, for me, the issue with CEOs is fundamentally one of digital transformation. If you step back from this conversation, I doubt there is a CEO in any industry that isn't aware that there is a sort of technology train coming towards their industry. And they're trying to figure it out. It's a board level conversation, and clearly connectivity and data is absolutely part of that. The question should really be sort of, can you afford not to do something about that? Because the recent history is sort of littered with examples of, you look at Kodak falling off a cliff at a time where Instagram then sells for $1 billion with 15 employees, as one goes into chapter 11. You've got sort of BlackBerry falling from a pinnacle of position in people's lives because they didn't see the shift from hardware to software. Nokia, other examples, Blockbuster, Netflix. I mean, we don't have to look far to see things really do change. And I think there's been times in history where all of the companies in the Fortune 500, a massive proportion of them have shifted.
Yeah.
So the question for CEOs, I think, whether it's machine learning or any other facet of this, is what do you do with this issue of connectivity and data and instrumentation and the physical world becoming part of the web? Because you have to do something. Otherwise, it's an inevitability that somebody else who does figure out how to harness that will be more competitive.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to have to end there. I think it's interesting to note that in our poll, not sure if the results were displayed on the screen, I think they were, the majority of the audience said that the companies they work for do not employ data scientists. So with that message from Andy that you need to know how to manage your data or else you're going to become Kodak, maybe we should be looking just with interest at the result of that poll.